Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Men for Life podcast. I'm Sean Corcoran, the CEO of Men for Life. Today, I am joined by Bradley Pierce. Bradley is with the Foundation to Abolish Abortion. How are you today, Bradley?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining me. So, what we're doing here is a series called What Should the Pro-Life Movement Want? And I came with this idea for this series after going to the March for Life in January. At the March for Life, it was my first time to go to the March for Life in the capacity as somebody who was a leader of an organization. I took over Men for Life in August of 2024. And so going there in that capacity and getting to speak and getting to hear so many different perspectives, I went in and I gave a talk at the Leadership Institute's conference. And I said, as I said at that time, in all of the talks I gave, I had my 11-year-old with me, my oldest son, who was videoing, and I pointed him out and I said, if men lead, then the next generation of men will be able to end abortion, right? That's the way that I put it. A little short-sighted, on my part, thinking, hey, I'm putting this off on my son. But I wasn't thinking about it that way. Then I went and I heard Abby Johnson speak at Life or Death Con. And she said something that really struck me. And what she said was, I want to end abortion today. If I leave this to my kids, then I have failed. And I'd never really heard that. I'd never really thought about it. All we ever talk about in the pro-life movement is we have to change the culture. Well, that doesn't give us an end game. And so in my mind, it was, we're going to change the culture, and then the next generation might end abortion. And I realized when I heard Abby speak that it was a little short-sighted of me to think that way. And then she said a lot of other things, and I'm sure you remember that time. It was when she first came out, like very publicly and very directly against different organizations and the pro-life movement as a whole. Donald Trump had just released funds back to Planned Parenthood, and she was upset about that and being very direct in her messaging. And so I left Life or Death Con, and I should say I was with my dad. All right, my dad is 73 years old. He has been pro-life for as long as I know. He has been active in pro-life since I lost my first child 29 years ago to abortion. And he actually runs a pro-life organization on his own outside of what I do, and he's been just the normal everyday donor to pro-life organizations around the country. Right, he's the guy that represents the people who send in $20, $50, $100 a month, and to watch his eyes open when he heard everything that they were saying there about how, is what we're doing really ending abortion, and to watch the wheels spinning and have the conversations that I was having with him, I realized that hey, like, there's some change coming. And then I went the next day to the march, and at the march I was backstage and just listening to conversations, and I heard many other pro-life leaders really being dismissive of Abby and the things that she had said, and in my mind, I was just thinking, you guys are missing something, because I had watched what had happened with my dad. Right, he's the normal donor, and so just having this thought, I came home and I wrote about it, and it was the idea that, hey, we should all take a step back from this, and we should look at what's going on objectively, and maybe get out of what we've always believed, because I think there's a change coming, and I think it's already started happening. The conversations are happening, but a big thing was the attempts to silence Abby in that position, right? And that bothers me because I saw the impact that her message has, and I think that silencing it is not the answer to anything, right? I do believe that all of us want to end abortion, whether or not we have the same plan, whether or not we have a concrete plan at all. We all want to end abortion. And so I believe we should all be working together in as much as we can. And so what I wanted to do was open up the door for all the different perspectives in this to come on and kind of share, this is how we feel. I will say that in the beginning, and I think that this has been toned down, the words criminalization, criminalizing women were used a lot in the January, February time period. And I think that drove a lot of emotions on both sides. And so that's kind of the tone that some of the first conversations that I had took. I think that, we can talk about that, but I think that that's an improper way to characterize anything. And so that's kind of where this "What Should the Pro-Life Movement Want" series came from. And so just to kind of lay out my position, just briefly, because I do want to give you the opportunity to share about the abolitionists, about your position, and anything else that you want to share. My position is that I believe that the unborn has equal value to the born child. I believe that both are image bearers of God. I believe that abortion is murder. And I believe that if we do not protect the unborn in the same way that we protect the born child, then we're failing. I also believe that because of 53 years of very effective messaging on the part of Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry, and I think we can all agree, I hope we can all agree that that they have been very effective, otherwise none of us would be here right now. And so very effective messaging. Some women are victims. And when I say some women are victims, I want to clarify, because what I've been shared with recently is this idea of two different characterizations of victims when it comes to the mothers, right? There is the victim in the sense that once she has an abortion, she now suffers all of the negative consequences of that. I agree that that's true, but that's not what I mean when I say that some women are victims. I think that anyone who commits a crime, anyone who commits a crime of nature, a crime against humanity, anyone that hurts another person will suffer. I don't think that's a reason not to have equal protection laws. I think that when I say victim, what I mean is there are women who, especially now with the abortion pill, and no one's monitoring it, and it's just coming from all over the place. There are women who will take this pill and be told and believe they're going to pass membrane, they're going to pass mucus, they're going to pass a large blood clot, and then they pass an embryo, and they are just shocked, and they really did not believe that was what's going to happen, and I recognize that not all women are victims in that sense. I recognize that there are women who shout their abortion, right? There are women who are very clear, "I'm going to kill this baby," as a video I saw yesterday. But some women are. And so my position is that we have to have equal protection laws, but that there are some steps we have to take before we go straight into equal protection laws. My position also is that Planned Parenthood has been effective for 53 years of messaging is not a perpetual excuse to not do anything. Like, it's a problem that we solve today, and that, we have 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 years to get this done, and we need to find a solution. So I just wanted to lay all that out so you can kind of see where I'm coming from. And then I really want to open the door for you to share about yourself, about how you got into this, about what the abolitionists are, and then, the difference between abolitionists and I think what you would call the pro-life movement.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Just a little bit about myself personally. I'm an attorney and been practicing for about almost 20 years now, and live in Texas. My wife and I have 12 children. In addition to, we've lost 4 to miscarriage as well. And but really got into this. I grew up Republican, grew up raised in a Christian home, but grateful for that, and grew up pro-life, and then became an attorney, started practicing, and started helping with some legislative things. And then there was an effort here in 2013 in Texas, where I'm at, uh, kind of a bill that did three things. There was a 20-week ban. There was it would pass a law that would require hospitals to have, or doctors at abortion clinics to have hospital admitting privileges, and it would require abortion clinics to meet surgery center standards. So, like wider hallways and things like that. And I remember, as an attorney, I'm like, oh, I've never gone and looked at pro-life bills. And I remember going and looking at those bills and just coming away thinking, wow, I have a bunch of friends that are going down to the Capitol to support this, but I don't feel like I, in good conscience, can, because it seems like we're conceding principles here. We're conceding that Roe versus Wade is the law of the land, and I don't believe that it is. I believe it's unconstitutional. And we're also conceding the humanity of the child. We're not treating them like we treat other human beings in our laws. And so we're undermining our own argument that they are equal because we're treating them unequally under the law. And we're treating this horrific act like it's just a form of healthcare. We're regulating when it can happen and where it can happen and how it can happen, the circumstances surrounding it, instead of say, no, this is a crime. Like you said earlier, this is murder. That's not how we were treating it. And in fact, it was even the law was even being put into our health and safety code instead of into our criminal code. And that's where most pro-life bills are not in the criminal code in most states. They're in the health code. Anyways, it was very disturbing to me at the time, but I was involved with lots of other things. But a couple of years later, a friend of mine got involved inside the Texas legislature, working for a legislator here, and his boss told him, "Hey, go talk to the pro-life groups, the major kind of lobby groups here in Texas. Tell them I'm interested in doing a bill that just forget Roe versus Wade. Let's just outlaw abortion here in Texas totally. Would you support that?" And my friend went on his boss's behalf, talked to them, came back, reported to his boss, and then told me what they had said, and that is they all said the same thing, and that is, not only would we not support that bill, we would oppose that bill. And that was kind of my first, like, wait a second. Not only are you doing things that I think compromise principles, but you're actually opposed to the things that are consistent with what we say we believe as pro-lifers, that life begins at conception, this life is equal with, made in the image of God from the moment of fertilization. You're actually opposed to laws that actually treat them that way. Okay, interesting. So somebody needs to do something about this. So some friends and I started working here in Texas toward that end. And just 2 or 3 months into that, we came into contact with the abolitionist movement, and we were like, yeah, this is what we believe. So we're abolitionists. And so that's kind of how we got started with what we're doing, and started here in Texas, but now we work and help states all around the country drafting legislation for equal protection, and providing education and data and things like that for abolitionists and legislators all around the country.
Do you when you draft the bills, are they all pretty similar?
They're similar in their effect and in their substance, yes. Now, every state's laws are different, so we can't write model legislation like a template, because we're not creating a new law. We have to interact with existing law, right? Every state already has laws against homicide, laws against murder, that all our bill really does in those states is come in and say, and this law against homicide applies from the moment of fertilization to everyone, right?
And I guess that's what I meant.
Everyone.
So the only one that I've read is the Tennessee bill that was proposed several months ago this year, and I think it was 2 pages, and that was the one that got everybody up in arms about they're trying to give women the death penalty, and which is, so I read the bill, and the bill didn't say anything about the death penalty. The bill didn't say anything about women, from my recollection,
Right.
except to provide them, where it said the word women or mothers, to provide them with protections in the instance that there was coercion, force, things like that. I think there was 2 places in the bill that I remember seeing the word woman or mother. And so
I think it was, yeah, I think specifically it was regarding medical emergency, right? Like a ectopic pregnancy situation, right? I believe that's the only time that a woman is actually mentioned in it.
So then, and then it applied, equal protection under the law to the unborn child, and so I guess that was kind of my question. And I feel like you answered it, but for those of us who aren't attorneys, or those who are listening who are not attorneys, if when you present these bills, even though it's not necessarily model legislation, is that pretty much the context of the bills? In each state is, the unborn is a person, right? These are personhood bills. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's one way of describing them. And some people have different meanings about the term person,
Okay.
and the pro-abortion movement twists that word. So I don't use it as often, but for people
Yeah.
who know if we're all talking about the same thing, then yes. But yes, these are bills that treat all human beings, that protect the lives of all human beings the same. Murdering a human being is murdering a human being, and all of our lives are protected the same, whether born or not yet born.
And so, how would you say this relates to the 14th Amendment?
I'd say that this is something that is required by the federal Constitution under the 14th Amendment. It says no state shall deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. I believe that term person there means all human beings. It doesn't mean corporations and trusts and things like that, but it does mean all living human beings, and that no state shall deny to them equal protection of the laws. Of what laws? Well, at the very least, laws protecting life, liberty, and property, which are mentioned just above in the 14th Amendment. And so life listed first. So no state is allowed under the 14th Amendment to deny equal protection of laws protecting life to any person. And I believe, and others have done research, great work on this, showing that at the time that 14th Amendment was ratified, that everybody pretty much universally understood that person included even from conception. And so I believe that that's how it applies. Now, the federal courts have not yet made that interpretation. I haven't seen them openly reject it either. They normally just haven't reached it. We argued that in the Dobbs case. We submitted a brief in the Dobbs case, but the court didn't reach that issue about equal protection. But we believe that it is, and that states should be required to provide equal protection. But even if courts don't agree with that, there's nothing prohibiting states from providing equal protection.
Right. So I'm gonna kind of jump around, and look, I know that a very important part of this conversation is the distinction between what you would call the pro-life movement and the abolitionists, right? And I do want to get to that because I think that's really important. But since we're talking about equal protection, just something that I've thought about and tried to talk with other people about is I have been told from people on both sides of this issue. When I say both sides in this context, I mean everyone is pro-life. So I'm talking about people who are for equal protection bills, people who are against equal protection bills, right? Within the pro-life movement. And so I have been told by people on both sides of that these bills, that there is not a judge who will enforce these bills, or not a prosecutor who will enforce criminal murder charges against a mom, right, is what they're referring to. And so my first question is, would you agree with that statement? And what I want to be clear, what I'm not asking is, I'm not asking, should they? I'm asking, given the current climate and what we know and everything that's going on, do you think that if we pass one of these bills today, how hard do you think it would be for somebody to be charged with these bills? Or do you think that the most effective part of these bills today would be the deterrent factor?
So as far as to the first part of that, do I think that there are law enforcement and prosecutors who would be willing to investigate and to prosecute, you know, murder charges, in the case of an abortion after a bill like this would pass? Absolutely, yes. I know some personally, and even beyond that, we know that for a fact because there've actually been arrests made and prosecutors that have filed charges against mothers who have engaged in self-induced abortions and have admitted those things. That's happened here in Texas. That's happened in Kentucky, and what's happened in those cases, and I think it's happened other places as well. What's happened in those cases is that they have to they ultimately let the woman go because they find out that that's actually these women have total legal immunity under the law because of the pro-life laws, and so you have to let them go. You cannot prosecute them. You cannot even get a civil injunction to stop them. You can't even give them community service. There's nothing you can do to hold them accountable in any way. And so we know for absolute sure that, yes, there are prosecutors, because there's prosecutors that are trying to do it who are not as familiar with the law, and they're just assuming, oh, wow, someone just admitted to murder, I can file murder charges. And it's only after, and they've done that, and it's only after they've done that they discover, oh, wait, there's this, get out of jail free clause in our pro-life law that applies to all women, and then they have to release them. And for example, in Texas, when the prosecutor did that here, he ended up getting disciplined by the Texas State Bar that governs attorneys, and now he's being sued for attempting to prosecute that woman. So that definitely there's plenty of people out there ready to prosecute if that needs to happen. But getting to the last part of your question, I think that if you pass an equal protection bill, the need to prosecute will be dramatically reduced, and you will see very, very few prosecutions because it will have an immediate deterrent effect upon most, the vast majority of those considering abortion.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. What I did was I went back and looked at the year before Roe versus Wade. The year before so 1972, there were 200,000 abortions, is what I was able to find. 1975, so 2 years after Roe versus Wade, there were 1 million. So, and there was no prosecution of women at that time. And so what that tells me is that the deterrence factor was effective at deterring 80% of the abortions. And, that 1 million number is very similar to what we have today as far as the data that we have. I think 2025 data was 1.126 million. And so a question that I ask often is and I understand that the dynamics of this has changed with the abortion bill, but we can only use data to use what we have. If they passed equal protection bills today and no one was prosecuted and deterrence was the only factor, and we could end 80% of the abortions today, is it worth it? I think that deterrence is a big factor, and I think that showing the math helps people to understand it a little bit better than just saying deterrence is a factor. Because 800,000. I mean, I have to believe that Roe versus Wade passing didn't just inflame in women across the country this immediate desire to kill their babies, right? Like that extra 800,000 women existed prior. The mentality existed prior. It was that no longer was there the fear of breaking the law. And I think that's a big factor. And another example I use is when I was in law school, we went and studied in France for a summer. And one of the big trips that people took when we were in France was to Amsterdam. Okay, and this is 2009, right? So this is before all the legalization, before America legalized cannabis, pretty much just everywhere. And so it was like just like a novelty, right? You can go to Amsterdam and they have cannabis and it's completely legal. And not everybody cared, not everybody was interested in that. But there were some people who never in a million years would they have touched cannabis in America or in Louisiana, where it was illegal, because it was illegal. And that's it, right? But in Amsterdam, where it was not illegal, they didn't have that same concern. And so the fear of the law, I think, is a deterrent. And I think that it's a big deal in small things. For me to, I'm gonna say marijuana is a small thing compared to abortion, like in small things or in big things. And so I can see how even if the objections were true, and I understand what you're saying, but I've heard from, for instance, A.J. Hurley said something similar to, we're not going to find a judge, we're not going to find a prosecutor who's going to prosecute a woman for murder, for abortion. And then people on the other side, like in the pro-life movement, have said the exact same thing. And so my question is, like, what if it's just a deterrent, right? Isn't that good enough? And I think that for the people in the pro-life movement, the question becomes, are we being honest with ourselves if we're saying we shouldn't pass these bills because no one's ever going to get prosecuted? Because if that's what we believe, then why do we care? But I think that legitimately there's the fear that people will be prosecuted. Otherwise, there'd be no reason to oppose these bills. So,
Right.
So I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that. And then the other thing is, and tell me your perspective on this. My thought is that once one of these bills passes, the first one, immediately it's going to be challenged, right? And that's most likely a bill or a challenge that will make it to the Supreme Court. And so the passing of one of these bills almost ensures that the Supreme Court finally has to make a decision on personhood of the unborn. In all the work that you guys have done, and yourself being an attorney, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, on that last part, I'm not sure that I would say that definitively. So, Dobbs, the fundamental holding of Dobbs was that the issue of abortion is left to the people and the people's representatives, right? And so if a state comes out and says, okay, well, we're going to have equal protection in our state, it doesn't inherently trigger, it doesn't inherently force the court to rule under the 14th Amendment and find that a fetus is a person, right? They could just rule under the 10th Amendment, like, yeah, this is a state issue, and so only if we pass a bill in a state, an equal protection bill in a state that has one of these new ballot initiatives, like, like Ohio or something like that, then in those states we're saying, hey, your ballot initiative, your new constitutional provision violates the federal Constitution, so it's null and void. So we're going to pass equal protection. If one of those states were to pass it, then yes, I think we would see that it would force courts, perhaps eventually the Supreme Court, to rule on the 14th Amendment question. But I think if a state that doesn't have that, where that's not an issue, it doesn't force the Supreme Court or any federal court to make a 14th Amendment ruling. Would we love to see a 14th Amendment ruling applying, the definition of person from fertilization? Yeah, absolutely, yes. But just passing a bill like that, equal protection bill in most states, will not force that question.
Got it. All right, let's get into the difference between pro-life and abolitionist.
Yeah, can you remind me of you said what pro-lifers should want, or what was your...
The name of the series is "What Should the Pro-Life Movement Want?" And you can separate yourself out from the pro-life movement, but when I say it, like I'm really including everyone who wants to end abortion.
Right.
So let me say that, and then let me allow you to break that down and tell me why it's wrong.
No, and I am pro-life in the sense that I am for life, right? And so that's what the term pro means, for. So obviously we're all that. That said, these terms, as we attorneys would say, these are terms of art. What is the pro-life movement? What is the abolition? These are somewhat vague in one sense, and who gets to define them is yet another question. But that said, I'll take I'll say something, and that is that these are two separate movements.
Okay.
What is commonly understood as the pro-life movement is completely separate and different from what is commonly understood as the abolitionist movement. And in that sense, I am not a pro-lifer. I am an abolitionist. So here's what I mean. Now, let's take a little bit to unpack. But here's what I mean by that. First of all, I've basically, abolitionists have been cast out of the pro-life movement. So from the very beginning, we were arguing for equal protection, and pro-life leaders were almost universally saying that's not pro-life. That's not pro-life. If you'll remember, even in 2016, now President Trump, then candidate Trump, was running for office. He was very, naive to all the ins and outs of the pro-life movement, but he's running as a Republican at that time. And he was asked, well, if you outlaw abortion, would there be punishment for women? And he says, well, yeah, of course there would be. There would be some punishment. And we saw pro-life leader after pro-life leader after pro-life organization coming out almost universally. And in fact, I didn't see anyone saying otherwise, and saying that's not pro-life, and saying in any kind of accountability for the mother, that is not pro-life. And so therefore, anybody who supports that is not pro-life. And so in that sense, the pro-life movement has excommunicated us abolitionists from the pro-life movement in that way. It's kind of like Martin Luther. He didn't say, "Hey, I'm gonna be a Protestant." No, he continued to call himself Roman Catholic, but the Roman Catholic Church said, "No, you're not. You are not a Roman Catholic anymore. We're excommunicating you." So that's happened to abolitionists, been basically excommunicated from the pro-life movement. But on top of that, we are the other reason I say it really is two separate movements is that from the ground up, from the foundation up, I would say it's two different movements. The pro-life movement, again, talking about the leaders, the traditional gatekeepers of the movement. There's many Christians involved in the pro-life movement, many sincere Christians, many of them doing it for Christian reasons. But the foundations of much of the pro-life movement have not been built on what does God say, have not been built on doing this as Christians and because God says to do it. And one way that you see that evidenced is when you see, most pro-life leaders go on to national television. It's one of the favorite tropes of the leftist interviewers to ask them, "Well, you're just doing this for religious reasons. It looks like you're just trying to force your religion on other people." And pro-life leaders will almost universally have said, "Well, no. We're not trying to do that. This isn't about religion. This is about human rights and science and things like that. And a lot of the arguments and strategy of the pro-life movement have been built on that. And again, not that they're wrong, right? Human rights, science, all these things are good, but that's not the foundation. We have to go further. Just like the fundamental, Scott Klusendorf, pro-life syllogism that's often used, and that is, you may know what I'm talking about, but I'm probably going to misquote it. My apologies to Scott. But it's basically taking the life of an innocent person is wrong. Abortion is taking the life of an innocent person, innocent human being. Therefore, abortion is wrong.
Yep.
And yes, we agree with that as far as it goes, but it doesn't go far enough. And that is, we have to take it back to a transcendent source. Because you could go into societies today, you could go back in history, and you could see that this idea of taking the life of an innocent person being wrong is not universally agreed to throughout cultures or throughout history. And so we have to have a transcendent source that tells us that. And that's Christ. That is God, who tells us that it is wrong to take the life of an innocent person. And we have to be willing to say that. And whenever we kind of check our Bibles at the door, or check Jesus at the door, whenever we go in and we make arguments, whether it be on television or in legislatures, whenever we do that, we're exhibiting a shame for Christ, and we're like, well, we don't want to use the Bible because that's not going to convince them, and that's going to they're going to laugh at us, and that. So let's use the things that we know they'll be okay with, and so where the abolitionist doesn't do that. That we believe that we should be yes, science, history, tradition, human rights, all of that, making all those arguments, but it has to go back to the transcendent source. We have to be doing this because this is what God says to do. That's where we get our moral authority. Whenever someone says my body, my choice, or even my baby, my choice, who are we to say that they're wrong? All right. Well, God says. And so that is our moral authority to oppose abortion. And then that means that we also go back and we say, well, how would God have us to outlaw abortion? And that's where we get, you go back and you look at what God says to do and what God says not to do. And that's how you get to abolitionist.
Are all abolitionists Christian?
I would say yes, because that's how I would define the term, that you are not an abolitionist unless you are a Christian.
Okay.
That said, there are certainly people who support equal protection, who may even call themselves abolitionists, who we're grateful that they support it, but I would not call someone an abolitionist unless they are a Christian.
Okay. Are you familiar with the Didache?
Yes.
Okay. So I actually posted something today from the Didache, and I'm going to read it because if I don't, I'm going to mess it up because I just became familiar with it last week. But so the Didache, for those people who are listening who may not be familiar, it's Didichae. The Didache is a first-century Christian document, kind of like a Christian handbook, so to speak, which may be considered like a first-century catechism of Christianity. And so going back to between 70 and 100 AD. And this is early Christians, right after Christ, creating a book it's the earliest known written catechism of the Christian church. And this is what it says in the Didache at 2.2. It says, "You shall not abort a fetus or kill a child that is born." And then at 5.1, it says, "Those who engage in infanticide or abortion are described as murderers of children, destroyers of the handiwork of God." And the reason that I asked that question, and the reason that I bring it up, and the reason that I posted it today is because I think that Christianity. I think most conservative Christians, especially, will agree with the statement that Christianity has become watered down in many places. And I think that this is a place where maybe it's been watered down where we don't even realize it, right? Because I know you know your Bible. Like you just told me that you're doing all of this because of God, right? But I still wasn't sure if you knew the Didache because, I found out what it was last week. And so I think most people may not be familiar with what were the actual teachings of the early Christian church, the Christian church that existed right at the time of Jesus, like right after the time of Jesus, right? What were the teachings and what was the belief? And I think what's really important about that is this is in pagan Rome, right? This is at a time where infanticide was common for, the wrong eye color. The same reason abortions are common. Cleft palate, club foot, if they would have had the ability for infanticide, if they could see a deformity, if they could see a disability, right? That's what infanticide was common. Abortion was also common. There was no value at all in pagan Rome given to the unborn or to even the born child. And so then Christians come along, following the teachings of Jesus Christ, and are very clear and are not shy, and don't back away from, you shall not abort a fetus or kill a child, and those who do are murderers of children. And I think that that's something that at some point we all have to reconcile ourselves with, is that this is the actual belief of the early Christian church. What we do with that afterwards, is dependent upon the person. But it sounds like that's where you're drawing your position from as well. Not the Didache,
Right.
but Christian beliefs
Right.
around this issue.
Right. Yes. Exactly. Well, and it's this is something that, yeah, like you pointed out, early Christians understood, and that a lot of us don't know, our history like we should, and oftentimes don't know our Bible like we should, and this kind of gets to another issue where the abolitionist movement and the pro-life movement have disagreements about, and that is a subject that God calls partiality. God repeatedly, both Old and New Testament, forbids partiality in judgment. So obviously, like being partial to someone or showing partiality to someone is fine as long as it's not in judgment, right? Well, I'm partial to this person, or I'm partial to my wife, or I'm partial to Chevy trucks, or whatever. You can have like favorites, that's fine, but not in court, right? A judge cannot have favorites. A judge cannot play favorites. He cannot rule in favor of one or the other based upon identity of the parties. So this, in the Old Testament, this word partiality that in English, in Hebrew, it means regarding faces. The judge is not permitted to regard or respect faces. This is why we see, like Lady Justice, she's portrayed, with the scales of justice, showing equal justice, and with a sword, and with a blindfold on, so that way justice cannot perceive the identity of the parties. Justice can only hear the evidence. So that's what God calls partiality. Impartiality is what the Constitution calls equal protection, and God forbids partiality. He forbids regarding faces. You cannot play favorites just because, well, this person's black, this person's white, this person's male, this person's female. You can, this person's born, this person's not yet born. This person's rich, this person's poor, this person's, weak, this person's strong, etc. You have to rule in cases based on the merits of the case, not the identity of the parties. However, you can go look at virtually every pro-life bill out there, and not only does it allow partiality in judgment, it actually requires partiality in judgment, because it says this is the law unless you're not yet born, or this is the law unless you're the mother, unless you're a woman. Like in many states, states that had trigger bills that outlawed abortion for clinics after Dobbs overturned Roe. If you go look at those bills, and they say that, right, if a man orders abortion pills, puts them in, a woman's drink, she drinks them, aborts their child, in many states, not only has he committed assault against a woman in every state, but he's committed homicide. And yet, if the woman does the exact same thing, it's complete legal immunity simply because she's a woman. And so that's partiality, which God says that he hates and he forbids. And yet that is what most pro-life bills require. And so that's one reason why abolitionists are opposed to most pro-life legislation, not only because, it doesn't provide equal protection, but also because it's actually codifying and enshrining something in law that God explicitly forbids and says that he hates.
Okay. So I want to touch on that a little bit more. So let's talk specifically if this falls in line with what you're talking about, heartbeat bills. Would that be a fair representation that heartbeat bills fall within what you're talking about?
Yes,
Okay.
actually, yeah. In fact, I have a talk out there on YouTube called "Does God Hate the Heartbeat Bill?" Yes.
Okay. I'll link that in the
It's an
description
older.
on
It was
YouTube.
before Dobbs, so it's a little bit dated.
Okay. So so let's just pretend there were no heartbeat bills, right? And today someone were introducing a heartbeat bill. What I believe I understand you to be saying is that that the abolitionists would oppose the heartbeat bill. Is that correct?
Correct. That's right.
Okay. So using that example specifically, can you go into a little bit more detail about why you would oppose a heartbeat bill?
Yes. So first of all, it's because I'll deal with partiality since I just discussed that. So first of all, because it requires showing partiality.
Okay.
So it requires saying, all right, have you yet reached this stage of development, right? And judging whether you get justice or not simply based on that, simply based upon, and it's like, again, if you were to walk into a courtroom and someone were judging a rapist and they were judging it solely upon, well, how old is the rapist or how old was the victim, and not just, oh, actually that makes it more heinous if it's younger. No, it's complete legal immunity if the victim is younger. People would say, well, that's unjust. Well, that's what's required by the heartbeat bill. That's what partiality is. But the other reason why we would that's really the main reason. But the other reason we would oppose the heartbeat bill is because it's not doing what God says to do. It's disobeying God, not only by showing partiality, but how does God say to deal with murder? He says, outlaw it as murder. That's what he says to do. He doesn't say regulate the who, what, when, where, why, and how of it. He says outlaw it as murder. And when we regulate the who, what, when, where, why, and how of it, we're actually legitimizing it. There's a form of legitimizing it when we do that, because we're no longer treating it like a sin, like a heinous sin. We're now treating it like, some kind of healthcare thing, that, well, yeah, this can be improved, and so let's just tweak the circumstances here and there to make sure this part of our healthcare system gets improved. We don't deal with sin that way. We don't when we're dealing with someone with sin, we don't say, well, if you're going to be committing adultery, sir, if a pastor's dealing with a congregant, just make sure you're committing it in this kind of hotel or on these days of the week or with this age of paramour. That's not how we deal with sin. We don't talk about sin, just the circumstances. Now, yes, we believe in progressive sanctification, right? That we deal with this sin, and then we deal with this sin, and then we deal with this sin, and then we deal with this sin. But we deal with it as sin. We say that is a sin. Stop doing that. It's an offense against God. And in this case, we're dealing with perhaps the most heinous of all sins, that is child sacrifice. And what we're not treating it as a sin, we're treating it like healthcare to be regulated, regulating the circumstances. And so that's not what God says to do. God says to outlaw it.
So then, if and I guess this is where I think many people maybe object to or would challenge that idea is, if we can pass a heartbeat bill and end, I'm going to make up a number right now, so let's just pretend that my
Sure.
made up number is right, and end 50% of abortions. Okay, isn't that better than nothing?
Right. Well, two things to that. First, if even if that were the case, and I'll talk about that next, but even if that were the case, we cannot do evil that good may come. We cannot do something that God forbids, that is showing partiality, even if the end that we seek is good. God forbids us from doing that. We cannot do good that evil may come. We cannot show partiality, which He forbids. Just like anything else, we can't commit murder to stop murder, right? I think we would agree with that. It
Right.
would be wrong for us to go murder someone in order to sometime. Obviously, I'm all for self-defense,
Right.
right? But we can't murder someone because 10 years down the road, we think that they're going to murder somebody else. That's wrong. But yet, that's kind of the argument here. Well, we can do evil that good may come, and I think it's because a lot of people haven't really considered this issue of partiality and just how vehemently God forbids it, and how He says it's completely contrary to His nature. But that's the first point. The second point is that I dispute the premise itself that the heartbeat bills save even one
All right,
life.
let's get to that one in a second. I want
Yeah.
to go back
Okay.
to your first premise,
Okay.
because I thought that's where you're going to go with it, and I do want to talk about that. But
Yep.
but I just want to make sure that I go deep enough into this. So
Yep.
if we have a legislature, and again, this is in a place where there are no heartbeat bills that exist, and if we have a legislature who 100% of the legislature, okay, because I think what you're talking about is a principle that if I'm correct, will apply regardless of whether it's 100% of the legislature or 80. So if 100% of the legislature comes out and says, comes out into the hall and says, look, we have two bills being presented. One is a heartbeat bill. One is an equal protection bill. 0 people will vote for the equal protection bill today. 100% of us will vote for the heartbeat bill. Then your position is still, we can't do it because of partiality.
Because God forbids it, right? And,
Okay.
and the other practical consequence of this is that when you and this is a problem with a lot of the pro-life lobby, is that they let legislators get away with calling themselves pro-life who don't actually support abolishing abortion. And so all these legislators, if they all say none of us will vote for abolishing abortion, but all of us will vote for this heartbeat bill, how will the pro-life lobby respond to that? They will give them awards and help them get reelected and all of those things, even though they are completely opposed to the actual abolition of abortion.
Got it. All right. Now I'm gonna let you talk about the effectiveness of heartbeat bills.
Right. So with heartbeat bills, number one, they are a hurry up and get your abortion bill. You can still get an abortion. As somebody asked the governor here in Texas after the heartbeat bill, he said, well, what about rape and incest? And the governor Abbott here said, oh, well, they still have 6 weeks. They can still go get it taken care of in 6 weeks. And so you can
Wait,
still, you can,
that's what he said, publicly.
yes. Now, the taken care of, that may not have been his exact words, but
Right.
he did say you still have 6 weeks to get an abortion.
Okay.
And so, yeah, it was pretty embarrassing. Um, but he, so it is not a bill that stops abortion. It's a bill that says you have to get it done faster. And a lot of people think, they think of it as, oh, this percentage of abortions are happening after heartbeat. So if you pass a heartbeat bill, you're going to save this percentage of babies.
Right.
That's fallacious, right? Because those babies, before they cross that heartbeat line, they are before that. So you can still abort 100% of babies. You just have to do it earlier.
But isn't the thought that most people don't find out they're pregnant? I mean, wouldn't that be the objection that the abortion industry had to those bills? Is that most people don't even find out they're pregnant until around 6 weeks?
I mean,
So,
that's certainly what is the objection, but definitely since after the heartbeat bill, people are using earlier and earlier methods to make sure that they know.
okay.
But with that said, the other issue with the heartbeat bill and why it doesn't even do that is because the heartbeat, go look at every single heartbeat bill, and either in their terms or because of their relation to other laws, none of them, even the heartbeat bills, apply to the mother. And so, although the heartbeat bill restricts when the abortion clinics can provide surgical or medication to them in that state, they do not apply to the mothers. And so the mothers can still order the abortion pills, take the abortion pills legally all the way until birth. Practically all the way till 13, 14, 15 weeks. Some are even doing it later than that, but there's more risk there. But very easily, well into the teen weeks. And so again, it sounds great. Oh, this many percentage happen after heartbeat. Let's pass a heartbeat bill that's going to save that percentage. But what ends up happening is they either just happen earlier or they just do a self-induced abortion at any point. And all of that is totally legal under the pro-life bills. And so we can go look at the numbers today in states with heartbeat bills, and we can see that the abortion numbers there are the same or higher than they were before. Now, some of that is from abortion travel going outside of the state, but a lot of it's still abortions happening in that state, either going to the clinic earlier or just ordering the pills online, which are now cheaper and easier to get than ever. And so the premise that they're saving babies. Now, again, I think we can point out isolated anecdotal cases where this woman, didn't do it because of the heartbeat bill. But as far as actual raw numbers, we're not seeing any real reduction in abortions because of the heartbeat bill.
Okay. I think that's helpful in understanding the abolitionist position. Then I guess the next thing would be, and take this as me coming into this. I was practicing law until a couple of years ago, and so me coming into the pro-life movement or working in pro-life is, as I told you in the beginning, is August of 24. So really trying to learn the landscape and watching everything, kind of from an outside perspective. This is one of the things that I see that I think may be the biggest hindrance to the work that you guys are trying to accomplish, and that is the aggressive messaging against other people, and I'm just going to keep using the term pro-life, and I want to be clear with you and with the audience that you did make a distinction just to make it easier for me to formulate my questions.
Sure.
That I'll even say anti-abortion, okay? And you may say, well, these people aren't anti-abortion, but bear with me. Otherwise, it's going to be, each question is going to be 45 minutes long. So is the aggressive nature that you as a group, take against people who are in the pro-life movement, but who you do not feel are fighting for the same thing you are. I'm trying not to be specific because I don't want to name name. Like I don't want to start stuff
Sure.
where stuff hasn't started. That's not my goal. I'm talking about just messaging against people you're opposed to, right? Within the pro-life movement, that is very aggressive and to the point that it not only makes enemies of those people, but is also off-putting to people who might otherwise agree with you.
Right.
That was a lot of words. So
Yeah.
if it's not clear in the way that I said it, please let me know.
Yeah. Well, first of all, there's a lot of abolitionists out there, and I appreciate passion, and one thing that I do appreciate about among many other things about the abolitionist movement is that people are passionate, and I think that this is an issue that we have been too comfortable with as a country and as Christians as well, and I think I'd rather err on the side of being too passionate, too hot, than too lukewarm about this issue. And so I don't think we should be speaking. I don't think we should be, just calm and casual about thousands of children being murdered every single day. So I get people being passionate. As far as I'm not against anybody, as a person. I love everybody. I try to respect everybody as a human being. That said, there are numerous pro-life leaders who have opposed abolition bills. Like I said, this is one of the reasons I got into this in the first place, was because these groups said not only would we not support that, we would oppose it. And we started doing this here in Texas, and they did exactly what they said they would do. They opposed it, and we've seen that not just here in Texas, but in every pro-life state where we filed equal protection legislation. We've seen pro-life leaders come out and oppose those things. We have a list of all those on our website with their direct quotes from all of them. If anybody wants to check that out, and so it's one of these.
I'll include a link to that as well.
Okay, great. It's one of these things that it's the pro-life leaders coming out and killing our bills, and then whenever we expose them for it, it's why are you attacking me? And it's because you killed our bill, right? You have the primary influence over these pro-life legislators in this state. And we had, in some cases, even a majority of them convinced to support abolishing abortion until you went and talked to them and dissuaded them from doing that. And so, yeah, people need to understand what you're doing, and we're going to expose what you're doing. It's not because we hate you, but it's because of what you're doing that it is wrong and evil, and people need to know about it. And so there's obviously a spectrum there, but there are people, at different levels of that. And we try to understand that and be patient with Christians and always treat Christians as brothers and sisters and talk about them that way. But not to talk about, sin and evil, with kid gloves. We believe that we should be exposing those things even when they are committed by people who think that they're well-meaning, and even by other Christians. And so that's what we're doing. Whenever they kill abolition bills, we let people know about it.
Do you ever sit down with those people privately and have conversations?
Absolutely. Yes, all the time.
Okay. And I think that's a really important thing to put out there then, that it's not just the social media, I think banter is a very tame word, but that it's not just the social media back and forth that gives the appearance of attacks. Because my next question was going to be, do you think that there's a level of diplomacy that could help to pass the bills that you're trying to pass more effectively and quicker? But I don't know how that diplomacy would happen other than sitting down privately and having those conversations. And it sounds like you're saying that's something that you guys do.
Yeah, we absolutely do. And again, we're having those conversations all the time with the actual lawmakers, with the legislators, and walking through the bill with them, explaining it, answering their objections, and that's where we even had in South Dakota recently. Earlier this year, we had a bill there that there was a majority of a committee that we had talked with and was ready to vote in favor of a bill, and we needed 7 votes, and we ultimately lost. But it was because 2 people who had already committed to vote for it, who were actually co-authors on the bill. So we can say this isn't just, us talking out of school or sharing something that's not provable. You can go look and see 2 people who voted against the bill had been co-authors just a few days before, until pro-life leaders came and convinced them, not to support it. And so we're all about having conversations. We're all about talking with people, reasoning with people. That's what we believe we should be doing. But a lot of times whenever we do that, others go behind us. Others who say, other pro-life leaders go behind us and undermine all that and turn people against abolishing abortion.
If you had to put yourself in their shoes, what do you think their main objection or objections are to what it is that you're trying to accomplish?
I think there's a spectrum, right? I think there's people who do have ill motives. There's certainly those out there, but I think there's people. I think I would say even the majority of them think that they're doing right, think that they're doing the right thing in opposing this, because they think, well, if we do this, then we're going to lose to the Democrats, and then they're going to impose something worse, or they think. A lot of them genuinely think all women are victims, and so we shouldn't be, no woman should be subject to any kind of legal accountability at all, and they genuinely believe that. And so there's a whole spectrum of reasons, but I don't think that they're biblical, and I don't think that they're sufficient reasons. And that's what that's part what we're trying to do, is show people that and convince people of that.
All right. I want to make sure that we hit on everything. Do you guys have any bills coming up in the near future?
There's still a few bills active. You can check those out on our website, but most legislatures are wrapping up for the year, or at least they've passed the deadlines, for bills to be passed by committee. And so, for most states, the legislative season has ended for this year, and so the next one will start up in January of next year, of 2027.
Okay. Pregnancy centers. If you got a couple more minutes, I think that's the last thing that I wanted to make sure that I touched on. One of the objections that I've heard voiced as far as the equal protection bills are that they will undercut the pregnancy centers. That it will make pregnancy centers ineffective. We talked before we started recording about the question of, will abortion-minded women go to pregnancy centers if essentially what would happen is, the fear of what would happen is that if abortion were illegal and there could be criminal implications, then if someone went to an abortion or to a pregnancy center who was abortion vulnerable and then didn't come back, would that then make the pregnancy center a mandatory reporter, right? Which would effectively, no one would go, is the fear. So I guess my question is, what would you say to that objection? And if you want to cite those studies we were talking about,
Right.
in this would be the time to do it, and we'll link the 2 studies as well into the show notes.
Yeah. So that's a lot of great questions, and I'm actually on the board of a pregnancy center group. So I love what most pregnancy centers do. There's always some outliers, but there's always some bad apples. But by and large, a lot of them do a lot of great things, and very grateful for that, for the resources they provide, reaching women with the truth, reaching women with the gospel. And so I'm very, very supportive of that. And I believe, today, the studies show that about 13% of abortion-minded women are going to pregnancy help centers, right? So 87% of them are not. And so the pregnancy help centers are not able to reach the vast majority of women. And even the women who are going, studies show around 42, 43% of them, even after going to a pregnancy help center and viewing an ultrasound, um, you know, those that they're deciding for life, meaning that about 57% are going through with the abortion. And so there's a whole lot of women out there that will never see pregnancy help centers that they're not seeing today, and even the ones they are seeing, many of them are still going through with it. And so, how can we reach the ones that pregnancy help centers are not reaching? Well, what's something that reaches everyone? That's the law. And then, how can we help pregnancy help centers convince the ones they are reaching to decide for life? Well, a very persuasive, thing that tool we can give them to say, and ma'am, if you go through with this, this is illegal, and there could be criminal charges. That's going to dissuade most from doing it. And it's like there's so many post-abortive women who are abolitionists, who say, I am an abolitionist because I wish this had been the law whenever I had an abortion. Because if it had been, if I could have been criminally charged, then I never would have done it, because I would have feared the consequences. And that's the whole point, right? No one's wanting to pass these laws because, like, hey, let's go punish a lot of women. It's no. It's the law has, before you even get to the whole justice and enforcement aspect of the law has a teaching effect, right? The law tutors the culture and helps shape people's mindset, just like Roe versus Wade did, or just like the abolition of slavery has. And so we can do that with our law. Our law can teach people, right and wrong, and that's what we should be doing. But then, even if it doesn't, if they don't agree with that and they still want to go through with committing that, the law then restrains people, has a deterrent effect. Just like many states that had trigger bills that went into effect after Dobbs overturned Roe versus Wade, right? You saw Planned Parenthood in a dozen states. Immediately, what did they do? They stopped performing abortions. Was it because someone got arrested, or because someone got sued, or because someone got prosecuted? No. It's just because there were penalties now if they did, because of these trigger bills. And the same thing's going to happen here, right? Once you pass equal protection, most of those considering abortion will not consider it because of the threat of penalties, without even prosecuting anybody, right? The law will just have an automatic effect on that. And so that's that's what we're trying to do here. So but the other thing is, what do pregnancy help centers do? Well, it's right there in the name. They pregnancy help. And if you have women who are not aborting, you're going to have many, many more women who are needing help with their pregnancies, who are needing what pregnancy help centers provide, who are needing prenatal care, needing ultrasounds, needing parenting classes, needing diapers, needing clothes, needing the support the pregnancy help centers provide. And so I believe there'd be many, many more women who would be coming to pregnancy help centers. And on the point of, some who are still thinking of going through with something which is now defined as a crime with penalties, them being dissuaded from coming to pregnancy help centers, well, they're not coming now. If they're already that determined that they would even, do it even with the threat of penalties, those are the ones that you're not even seeing now. And if someone does come and confess something, would you be required to report? We've actually just did a survey of all 50 states just in the last couple of weeks on that point, and the answer is no. You would not be required to report, because changing the criminal law does not affect the family, juvenile, child welfare, child abuse laws, which that's where the mandatory reporting laws are. And so there would not be a requirement to report legally, although if someone is coming to you saying, I am planning to abort my child, even though I know it's murder and I could be prosecuted, then should you, even though you don't have a legal mandate to report, should you report? Yes. Just like Proverbs 24:11 says, rescue those who are being carried to the slaughter or stumbling towards death. I think you morally ought to call the police and save that child's life, just like if it were a born child. And that should be the mindset that we should all have.
Yep. And I think that's where my hope is that we can unify, whether it's abolitionist, pro-life, I do think that we could be much more effective if we all work together. And, the issue is, what is it we're fighting for, right? And that's kind of like, what is it? What should the pro-life movement want?
Well, and can I add one thing
please.
to that real fast? And that's, and this kind of gets to the really kind of, I talked about distinctions between pro-life movement and abolitionist movement. And I think this is a fundamental one. And that is that, what should the pro-life movement want? The abolitionists would say, well, I think generally the pro-life leader would say, well, we want to save babies, right? We want to save babies and serve women. And we would say, yes, but that's not ultimately what we want. Ultimately, what the abolitionists would say, what we want is we want to glorify God. We want to glorify God. We want to obey God. And the result of that will be the saving of babies, the reaching of women with the gospel, the protecting of women from men or others who would, coerce or pressure them into abortions. That would be the result. But our fundamental aim is to glorify God, to obey Him, and to do what He tells us to do. And then the result will be the saving of the babies. But the goal is, what we should want is His glory above all else.
Yeah, I really like how you said that. And I do think that if that were proposed, that the majority of people in the pro-life movement would say the same thing. So then the question becomes, how are you going to do it, right? Like, how are you going to glorify God? And like, what is the plan? And the abolitionist plan is end abortion, right?
Well, I would say that the way I would put it is, how would we glorify Him? By doing what He tells us, by doing what He commands, which He commands.
Right, but the practical step.
He doesn't command regulating circumstances.
Right.
Never commands that. What He commands is outlawing it as murder.
Outlawing as murder. And so then that's the question for everyone should be like, what is it? Because I agree with you, like in everything that we do, like that should be the goal. The goal should be to glorify God. And so, so making the assumption that I will, regardless of whether I'm right or not, that is the goal of all Christians in the pro-life movement, is to glorify God. Then the ultimate question is, what are the practical steps that we are going to take in this arena that will serve that goal? Did I ask that in a way that you...
Yeah. What are the
I don't want to keep getting it broke down, but I mean,
Yeah.
like, you want to end abortion, you want to outlaw abortion. And so my question to everyone is, like, what are we doing? We being those of us who would call ourselves pro-life, who are not abolitionists, that serve that same end,
Right.
What are we doing to show that? I don't know how else to say it. It is, but basically, like, you believe as abolitionists that the way that you will glorify God is by doing His will, and that His will is that you outlaw abortion. Did I say that right? Okay.
Outlaw
So then my
abortion
question
as
would
murder, like He, right?
Okay.
Like He
Outlaw
described,
abortion as
or
murder.
as child
So then
sacrifice, right?
Then my question to the remainder of the pro-life movement is, what say you? Like what is our goal to meet that same? I think that's the ultimate question.
Yeah.
That I'm trying to get to the answer, and get to the ultimate.
And I think there's so many wonderful Christians who, are part of the pro-life movement and have been doing a lot of great things. But I think there's also a lot of them who check their Christianity at the door whenever it comes to strategy and tactics for abolishing abortion. And And I think that that's something that's one reason why we're seeing continued failures across the country and really in every state, because we have not abolished abortion in any state. In every state, it's still 100% legal for women to order, obtain, possess, and take abortion pills to murder their children. And there's no law that prevents them from doing that in any state. That's by design of the pro-life bills that are written that way. And so what I would say to the well-meaning Christian who, would set aside what we believe is God's strategy, I think a lot of it is, are we being presumptuous? Or do we think we know better than God? Well, yes, God, you say that we should do this, but we can't do that. I mean, that's not going to work. I would say, be consistent with your Christianity. Apply it here. Have faith here. Walk by faith and not by sight. And I'm not just trying to be some idealist, pie in the sky kind of thing. I do believe that God blesses it when His people do that. And so, practically, how do we get from here to a nation which does value life and which does outlaw abortion? It's not by doing the same thing the pro-abortion movement does. Right? We don't, they're all about showing partiality, right? A mother has the right to murder her child as long as before the child's born. But we don't fight partiality with partiality. We don't fight undermining the value of life by undermining the value of life, just at a slightly different stage. That's not how we win. That's how we continue to be a part of indoctrinating the culture that this isn't life and it's not murder, because that's the way that even our pro-life legislation is treating it. And so where we've been a part of that, we actually need to repent of that and say, God, I've not been doing this the way that you've commanded me to do it. I've been trying to be, I've been compromising principles. And I'm all about, I'm a lawyer. I love compromise, like negotiations and all that, but not compromising principles. And many of us have been doing that. And that's where we need not just to change our strategy and tactics. That's where we actually need to repent for our lack of faith or our lack of obedience. And that's what we're trying to do as abolitionists.
Got it. Well, Bradley, I really appreciate you coming on and joining us today. I think that this has provided a lot of good information. I know I've learned a lot, and I think that it will help other people to learn as well. So many times when we get into this conflict, especially now with the way social media is, everything's it's just easy to dislike people based on, sound bites, based on
Right.
a tweet, right? Like, it's just easy because you don't actually have to interact with those people. And so these conversations, I think, are critical to any of us moving forward in any kind of a meaningful way. And so I really do appreciate your time. I know you gave me way more than I asked for. So thank you for that. And I think this is going to be really helpful to a lot of people.
Well, I very much appreciate it. And thanks for doing this.
All right. And we will talk to you again soon.